Okay, welcome everyone. Today I want to talk about a lot of different things really. The first part is going to be about something new about the community, about the project using Symfony. Then I'm going to talk a bit about the new features coming in Symfony 2.4. And I have some nice announcements for the end of the presentation. So first, packages and Composer started to be used for Symfony about half a year ago. And during that time, the number of downloads for Symfony and all Symfony components has been really huge. And actually, Twig was the first project to hit the 1 million downloads on packages. It was at the end of June this year, 1 million downloads. Only on packages, so it does not count, take into account downloads, direct downloads from the website or via the per channel. And as of today, it's about 1.7 million downloads, which means that we are going to reach the 2 million downloads by the end of the year. Meaning that the second million will be done in less than 6 months. And of course, since June, a lot of different packages hit this 1 million download milestone. 1.5 million downloads for SwiftMailer. And if you have a look at the number of downloads for Symfony Full Stack, plus all the Symfony components that are used by other open source projects, then the number is 21 million downloads since April last year, so in the last 18 months really. Which means that Symfony, Full Stack Framework, or some of the Symfony components altogether, it's about 1 million downloads per month. I think that's a huge number. Really proud of that. If you have a look at all the different components that we have, all those components enjoyed more than 500,000 downloads in the last 18 months, and 2 of them have more than 1 million downloads, the console and even dispatcher. And remember that those numbers, they don't take into account, for instance, Drupal, because they're not really using Composer yet, so everything is embedded into their Git repository directly. And as you can see, the Finder, Foundation, Kernel, YAML are also really popular. And all those downloads, they come from proprietary software, of course, but also from a lot of different open source projects that are actually using Symfony, the Symfony components as their foundations. Here are some of the logos for the main projects using Symfony, the Full Stack Framework, or the components. And their strategy is really depends on the maturity of the project, what they are doing really. So some of the projects decided to remove their homegrown framework and replace it with the Symfony one. Some others have a different strategy, trying to replace some of their code with some of the Symfony components. And at some point, I thought that it would be really cool if there was a way to give them more exposure in the Symfony community. So during the last year or so, I started to create a list with all the projects that are actually using the Symfony components. And that's what I call the Symfony family, really. They are part of our community. They are contributing some bug reports or even bug fixes or implementing new features. They are helping us in the sense that they have some needs that are not really fulfilled right now, so they ask us for new features. They force us to decouple our code so that they can use some part of the components without dependencies on other part of the code. So I thought about a way to actually give them more exposure on the Symfony.com website. We already have a section on the website, symfony.com/components, where we list all the components that we have with a link to the code, the documentation, and a small description of what the component is actually about. And as of today, you can also click on each of the components, and we have a new page for each component. So this is the one for HTTP kernel. And as you can see, we are listing now all the projects that are actually using these components. So as you can see, Drupal, PHPVB, right, Laravel, and some more are using this HTTP kernel component. Right. And of course, you can also click on a project, and then so you have a small description. You can click on Drupal to go to the website, you have the logo, and then at the end of the page, you can see that we list all the components that are used by this project. Sorry, I'm going too fast. So this is just a list. This is a new entry in the menu, projects using Symfony. And this page lists all the projects that I'm aware of with a bunch of information. And then there is a dedicated page for every single project where you can see the components that are used by the project itself. So as of today, I have listed 40 plus projects. And of course, if you have a project that is not listed here, and if you are using some of the Symfony components or the Symfony full stack framework, you can add your project to the Symfony family. Just go to the Symfony marketing repository. This is where we store all the marketing stuff for the Symfony.com website. You can help us translating stuff for the main get started, what is Symfony sections about. So all those sections, all the text are in this repository, so you can translate or fix typos or whatever. And as of today, you can also add your project there, or fix issue if we make some mistake with the initial database node. So, and it also demonstrates that we want to be part of the larger PHP community. It's not just about Symfony, it's about being a good PHP citizen and trying to share as much things as possible with the whole community. Right? And of course, it also demonstrates the interoperability that you can get from all the projects that are using Symfony somehow. So that was the first part. Now I want to talk a bit about Symfony 2.4. So, as you might know, we are late in the process now, so we are feature freeze. As always, there's been a lot of activity for Symfony 2.4, and we're going to release Symfony 2.4 at the end of this month, which means that we still have a month to fix all the problems that we still have. We have quite a few critical ones, and hopefully if we can fix them really fast, we will be able to release the first release candidate probably at the end of next week. There is a hacking day tomorrow, so you are all more than welcome to come, helping ironing out all the problems in Symfony 2.4. And if you are not aware yet, we have this new roadmap page on Symfony.com where you can get some notification whenever there is a new release for Symfony. So you can get information when a release is coming. All the releases are only for security issues. And you can also have a notification when there is a version that goes out of maintenance, which is always a nice thing. Out of this 1200 something commits, I think we have about 30 new or improved features in Symfony 2.4. I'm not going to talk about all of them today because I wrote a lot of blog posts about them on the Symfony blog, so this is the list of all the things I've talked about on the blog. I'm just going to talk about one of these. And this is the new form panel in the web profiler. So this post was published 2 days ago, I think, or yesterday, don't remember. It is really nice because the form framework in Symfony is probably one of the more complex components that we have. Dealing with the form is always a complex thing, actually. And this panel helps you figure out what's going on with your form, so you have a lot of information about the form, all the fields you have, the configuration, the options, etc. You can drill down in the form. So it's going to help you a lot when you have a problem in the form, trying to figure out what the issue can be. And out of those 30 plus features, I think there are two big features in Symfony 2.4. Two features that are going to change the way you are working with the framework. The first one is the expression language, and the second one is the request stack. So the first one is expression language. I'm not going to talk about why we came up with this idea and why it was actually a good idea to create this new component, because I've talked about that during the SymfonyLive London conference. So if you want to learn more about the expression language and why we decided to create it and which kind of problems it actually solves, you can have a look at the talk. I think it's online on YouTube now. And Sophie? Yeah? Okay, thank you. So the expression language provides an engine that can compile and evaluate expressions. And actually, the language itself is a stripped-down version of Twig, the Twig expressions, actually. And the big difference between Twig and the expression language being that we have two different modes for the expression language. The first one is the compilation mode, in which the expression is compiled down to PHP, like in Twig, the difference being that you don't need any runtime environment, which means that as soon as you have the compiled version of the expression, you can use it without anything else. You can just evaluate run the expression. That's the first mode. The second mode is the evaluation mode, where you evaluate on the fly the expression without compiling the expression to PHP, which is not possible with Twig. You always have to compile it to plain PHP code. And because of those two modes, we have some restrictions. And the main one being that we can't abstract the dot notation as we do in Twig, which means that when we say foo.bar, it is the bar property of the foo object. It cannot be anything else. And if you want to call a method, you need to be really explicit, so you need to say the method name is getBar, and you need to use the parentheses, even if you don't have any arguments, right? And the square brackets can be used for RxS, right? And that's because we don't want to have a runtime environment. So as soon as everything is compiled to PHP, we need to be able to run the code without anything else. And we want, and the second thing is that when we compile the expression, we compile it to a PHP expression. So just one line of PHP, right? So it's not a script actually. Okay, so using the expression language is simple enough. You create a new expression language object, and then you can evaluate an expression, or compile an expression, and you will get back the PHP code. Nothing fancy. So, as I said before, this is exactly the same as what you can do with the Twig expressions, which means that you can you have all the math operators, you have the ternary operator, you have arrays, hashes, booleans, you have all the operators like the matches, the new ones in Twig 1.14, I think. All those things are available in the language, the expression language. So, now let's talk a bit about how you can use the expression language and how it has been integrated into the Symfony full stack framework. So the first usage is in the container. Right? So let's say that we have this class. This is the foo class, and the class takes the local as a constructor argument. Right? So if you know something about the container, you know that the local is an argument that you need to define in your container configuration, and it can only be two things: a parameter or a service. Right? So the local here is probably a parameter, but this is a dynamic one, because the local depends on the user, or the request object, whatever. Which means that you can't define a static value for the local, right? So using a parameter is not possible. And using a service is not possible either, because local is not an object. This is a string, right? So in this case, using the expression language actually solves the problem. Of course, there is a workaround. So in Symfony before 2.4, this is what you can do. You can declare a service as a factory, and then for the factory class, you can also use a service. So we are using here the request service, and the method is getLocal. And it works, but as you can see, the getLocal method is going to return a string, not an object. So it works because we don't enforce the fact that a service is actually an object, but conceptually, that's kind of ugly, really. That's a hack. It works, but that's not really what the good usage of this feature. So instead of doing that, out of Symfony 2.4, you have a new argument type, which is expression, and then you can give it any valid expression, right? So, and the container is actually the container object. So here in the foo class, I want to inject an expression, the result of this expression. I want to get the request service from the container and then call the getLocal method. So as you can see, you can chain calls like in Twig. So this is really a small DSL that you can use, and of course this is quite verbose, which means that we try to make it more easier to use. So in Twig you can create your own filter, functions, and so on. In the expression language, the only extension point is actually the function. So you can define new functions. And by default, in the context of the container, you have two functions. One is service, and it returns the service based on the service name that you are giving to it. So the first line, service request, it returns the request service. And as you can see on the second line, you can also use the parameter function to get the value of parameter. Okay. So what about performance? Actually, there is no overhead whatsoever, because in this context of the container, you're going to dump everything to PHP. So we are going to use the compilation mode of the expression language. So if you have a look at the compiled PHP file for this definition, this is how it's compiled. So this is exactly the code you would have written by hand anyway, right? So no overhead. And it does not depend anymore on the expression language. Okay, so we have many other possible usage, and I think this one is the most interesting one. So it's a bit more complex to explain, but so this is the access control you have in the security component of Symfony. So this is how you can configure an access control rule in the full stack framework. So the first part of the screen, at the top of the screen, is wrong, totally wrong. So what we are trying to achieve here, we're trying to say, okay, all the URL that match the /_ pattern should be restricted to the localhost, right? So what we want to do is, if it is the localhost, the IP address, then the role, we restrict the role anonymous, which means everyone, right? So you don't need a special role to access this resource. It doesn't work because, I won't explain that. It's really well explained in the documentation, but the right way to do that is the second one, where you say, if the path is _internal, start with, and if the IP address is localhost, that's fine. If not, you have the second rule, and it says if it is _internal, then you need the role no access. The role no access does not exist, so nobody has access, right? So you need those two rules. Not sure if it was clear enough. Probably not. But that's fine, because as of Symfony 2.4, it is much easier, right? You can say, if you want to get access to _internal, you need to have the localhost IP address for the client IP coming from the request. That's all. So I think it's much easier to understand and really more intuitive than what we have today. And of course, as you can put any valid expression here, you can do more complex things, like this one, where you say, okay, if I'm on the localhost, then you don't need any special role. And if you are in a production machine, then you need the admin role to get access to this path. Right? And again, we have a special DSL, so this as role function is only available when you are in the security context. Right? When you are using the expression in a security, in an access role. So you can also do the same with annotations in the controller. So here I'm restricting this controller to people with the admin role. I think it's kind of easy to understand how it works. And so this is part of the framework extra bundle. It's not part of the framework bundle or the security bundle. And in the SymfonyLive's framework extra bundle, we also have support for the cache annotation. And before, as of today actually, because it's not launched yet, you can only use the HTTP expiration strategy for the cache. Right? So you can say, I want to expire this page in 15 seconds. But, and we can't really do HTTP validation because you need to have some kind of dynamic things, really. You need to be able to express something that is dynamic. And that's possible now with the expression language. So this is how you can, oh, not this one. Yeah. So, for instance, here I'm saying that we can send a last not modified header if the post get updated date is the same as before, right? So the validation is done on the post updated value. Right? So this is the boilerplate code you have to write to actually use HTTP validation, and we can simplify that a lot by using the expression language. We can remove all the boilerplate code actually and just say, okay, I want to cache the page for 15 seconds, and the last modified header should be checked with the post.getUpdated code, right? Value, actually. And post is actually so you get access to the request and all the variables that are accessible via the signature of the method. So as I have the post as an argument of the show action method, I have access to it in the expression. Okay, so it's really about creating dynamic annotations. And we found a lot of different usages, really. And the next one is the routing system. And as we want to match a route as fast as possible, by default, the full stack framework compares your route definitions to a PHP file, right? And if you have a look at it, you will see that it is highly optimized. We try to optimize that file as much as possible, but again, it means that we can only allow static configuration of your routes. You can't have logic in the routes. And thanks to annotations again, this is now possible. So in a route, you have this new condition item for a route where you can pass any expression. So here I said that I want to match /hello/name only if the method is get or add, and of course you can still use the old way of doing things with the methods item. So I want to only match when the method is get or add, and I want to match only if this is Firefox, right? Yeah, it doesn't make any sense, but you get the idea. Right? So you can add any condition based on the request headers. And again, Everything is compiled to plain PHP without any need for a runtime, which means that if you have a look at the cache, you will see that that kind of code where the code is in array blah 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 blah, which is exactly the code you would have written in your controller to check directly. Right? So no overhead. I'm even going to say that it is much faster than doing that the old way in the controller because it's done in the routing system, so we will not call the controller anymore. We have also some usages in the validator, so we have a new assertion expression, and again you can do whatever you want. The value is actually the value of the property you are going to validate. So this is just a very simple example of how you can use that. So the new expression language can be used for many different cases within the framework, but also in your applications. It's a very good component to create a business rule engine, actually. I've given you some examples here on the screen, and the idea is to get the webmaster actually configuring the website without knowing anything about PHP and without the possibility to actually mess up with PHP code. And I've not mentioned that before, but you must know that whenever you want to compile or evaluate an expression, you must pass the variables that you want. You must declare the available variable in the expression, which means that you can't escape the expression. So if you say that you only have access to the user variable, you won't be able to access this or whatever global variable you might have in your code. So this is a very restricted sandbox, and it's very secure. So this is new in 2.4. We've seen that we have used it in a lot of different places in the framework itself. In framework extra bundle, you can use it in your own code. So I'm very excited about it. I think it's going to solve a lot of different problems that you might have in your code also. Give you a very powerful tool. So that's the Unit 2.4. The request stack. This is the second one. Much easier to understand actually. So, as you know, in Symfony 2, the request is a service. And this is a problem. This is a problem for many reasons. And the good news is that these problems are actually solved in 2.4. So let's see what I'm talking about. So how many of you know what a scope is? Not too bad. Elf, probably. How many of you know what a strict service is? 2? Only 2? Really? 3? 4? Okay. Synchronized services. Okay. So, and do you know why and when you need to use those features? Okay, those are the most complex features of the dependency injection container. We have extensive documentation about those features, but I think it's kind of hard to understand how they work, and it's kind of hard to debug when you have some problems. And the good news is that they are only useful for a very small number of problems actually. And if you think about it, they are mainly useful for the request service and to solve the problems that we have with the request service. Why is it so? Because in Symfony we have this concept of fragments or sub-requests, which means that when you have a master request, at some point in the template you can say I want to embed the result of another controller code. Like this, so you say I want to render this controller, it's going to embed the response content within the context of the master request response. Right? It means that so this is the request workflow of Symfony. You have a request, you have a bunch of events, and at the end you have a response, and it's sent back to the browser, right? But as you can see here at the top, we have this loop where when you are actually evaluating a controller, you can call a server request. So you go back to request, you do everything, and you have the server response content that is actually embedded. Which means that within one PHP process, you can actually have more than one request instance. And so when you have these kind of classes, we have a full service, and you take the request as a constructor argument. Which request are you going to get here? The master request, one of the sub-requests, the first one, the last one, which one? Actually, this is undefined, because it depends when this class is going to be instantiated. Right? So if it is instantiated before the ending of a request, you're going to have an exception, because the request does not exist yet. Right? So you won't be able to create this service anyway. If you are in the context of the master request, you will get the master request. If it's only called when you are ending a sub-request, you're going to have the sub-request. And of course, as soon as you get a request, it won't change anymore. So if you have the master request, you will always have the master request, even if you are ending a sub-request. So it might be a problem. If you are calling get local here and do something, that's probably fine, because the local is probably going to be the same for all the sub-requests. So that's not really a problem. But sometimes it can be a problem. And of course, the simplest way to fix this problem is to inject a container instead of injecting a request. Right? Because now, every time you want to get something from the request, you can get the request service from the container. The container knows about the current request, and so you will always have the right request. Right? And of course, this is bad ID. This is my tip number 1. But you are all aware about this one. You don't want to inject a container. You need to inject dependencies instead. Right. Okay, so and the problem here is that we can have more than one request in a single PHP process. Right. So during the lifetime of the container, the request instance actually changes. The state of the request is mutable. Right. And it's even more than that, because the instance itself is not exactly, it's not the same. So, and if you think about it, this is the only service that has this special behavior. So to cope with it, we introduced those many concepts: scopes, strict services, synchronized services. And with synchronized services introduced in Symfony 2.3, it's kind of painless to use and to inject the request into your services, but still it's just an act to fix the it doesn't fix the root cause of the problem, which is that the request should not be a service. It should not be a service because the request is actually a data object. This is a value object, right? It's not a service. Like the response, actually. And as you know, the response is not available in the container for good reasons. And it works. We don't need a response in the container. So we should not have the request in the container. And it works in many ways, really. Okay, so how can I get access to the request in my services if I can't inject the request, if I can't use the container because this is not a good idea or not a good practice? Then how can I do that? Instead of injecting a request, you should instead inject a request stack, which is a new object in Symfony 2.4. And a request stack knows about all the requests from your PHP process. So you can call get current request. It's going to give you the current request. Right? So every time, of course, you don't want to store the result of the get current request call into the class property or whatever. Every time you need to get the request, you need to get it from the request stack. Right? And the request stack knows exactly when to switch from the master request to a sub request, and when the sub request is done, to switch back the request to the master. And if you are outside the ending of a request, no exceptions, you're going to get none. Right? So if it's none, it means that, well, there is no request, so you need to do something about it. I'm not saying that you can't get the request directly. I'm not saying that you need to always use the request tag, because sometimes the framework injects the request and trusts the framework is doing the right thing. Right? So in a controller, for instance, if you want to get the request in an action, just tag int with request. That's fine. Right? Because the framework will always inject the right request. And the same goes for event listeners, for instance. You can get a request from the event, that works. So just don't do it yourself. Don't inject the request yourself. And that's the tip number 2. As of Symfony 2.4, of course. Never ever inject the request yourself. Use the request tag instead. And you should do that now, because I'm not going to talk about Symfony 3. No need to tweet about that. It's just to tell you that the request service is going to be removed in Symfony 3. So you won't be able to get the service, the request service from the container as of Symfony 3.0, which is not going to be released anytime soon anyway. And I'm pretty sure that if you have a look at your code, upgrading won't be that difficult anyway, because I think, you know, the number of examples where you need the request in a service, they are really, really small. And actually, I think it was at the beginning of this week, I started to work on Silex 2.0. You can have a look at what I've done in this branch 2.0 experimental. I've made a lot of cleanups there, and one of them is I've actually removed the request as a service. It was really painless. I had to fix some of the tests, but just because the tests were not that good anyway. But I'm pretty sure that it won't be a problem. Try with the project. Just remove the request as a service and see how it goes. And I'm pretty sure that everything is going to be fine. Okay, so that's about Symfony 2.4. A lot of different tweaks on existing features. Nice small features or big features like the form panel for the web profiler. 2 big features, the request stack, which is really a clean-up of our mess, my mess actually, and what was the other one? The expression language, which is going to simplify your life a lot. Yesterday I talked about sensorless insight. I won't talk about sensorless insight right now. Just wanted to mention that those kind of stuff, the fact that you don't want to inject the request into a service, that's the kind of stuff that are checked by sensorless insight. And actually, we have added a rule this week checking for that. So if you are analyzing, I think it's not deployed yet, so it's going to be deployed next week. But if you try to analyze a project using Symfony 2.4, and if you are injecting a request into one of your services, Insight is going to tell you that it's not a good idea and that you should inject the request tag instead. And it's doing the exact same thing for the container actually. So, yeah, and if you know nothing about SensorLabs Insight, that's about time to know about it. So go to Connect, create an account, ask for private beta access, and during the conference I'm activating all the accounts right away, so if you want to become today, that's possible. I have one more thing to talk about. Today, 2 years ago, we organized the Symfony Awards, the Community Awards, and we are going to do the same thing this year. So we've just put the awards.symfony.com website online, and like 2 years ago, we have the Community Awards where you can vote for the best contributors, people helping for documentation, people helping on the forum, mailings, RC, whatever. So we have a bunch of categories. I think we have 9 categories actually for the Symfony Community Awards. New this year, we're going also to have the Business Awards, where we can nominate websites, websites using Symfony actually. And again, I think we have 9 categories there. And the Symfony Awards ceremony, we are going to have a ceremony this year. It's going to happen during the SymfonyCon Warsaw that is happening in December. I think we have less than 40 places left. Yeah? So you need to hurry up if you don't have your ticket yet, because it's going to be sold out in about probably a week from now. So don't wait too much. I think that's all for today. Thank you, and if you have any questions.
Will it be possible to get the master request from the service in sub request?
My answer is no. The technical answer is yes. So you can call get master request if you want to get the master request. My recommendation is don't do it. Because one of the goals of the fragment sub-framework of Symfony is to actually make all the sub-requests independent from the other ones and independent from the master request. That's because even if today you are using you are not using a reverse proxy like Varnish, which means that the sub-requests are actually evaluated in the context of the master request in the same PHP process, meaning that you can get access to master request. If at some point you want to switch and use a reverse proxy, you won't be able to get the master request anymore, which means that you will have to refactor your code. And if you need to get access to master request in a sub-request, that's a bad smell, really. It means that there is something wrong with your sub-request, with the decoupling of your code. That there is something going on that's not good, really. So, technically, yes, you can get access to the master request, but not really. But I know it was one of the frequently asked features for Symfony, so that's why it is available. Because I know that some people want to mess up with their code, so if you want to do so, feel free to do so. Any other questions? Yeah? Okay. And see you tomorrow? Yeah? Yes? Yes? Okay. Go grab some beers.